What up? What up? What up? It's the man Sean P coming in live. This is the Sean P Experience, man. I've been away for a few weeks. I am so excited to be back on the platform here at the Sitting with the Griots podcast, where we highlight authors, thinkers, just very, very creative people, and get to the nooks and crannies of how they do what they do. Today's guest is no exception from that, man. I am so glad to have my brother on the podcast, man. G'Ra Asim, how you doing, my brother?
So good. Great to be here. Excited to chop it up with you, Sean.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let me do your official introduction for the audience, right? Today, I am joined by the writer, musician, and educator, G'Ra Asim, assistant professor of creative writing at Washington University in St. Louis, and the author of 99 Problems Finding the One. We're talking about love, loneliness, relationships, creativity, identity, and a connection where we have never been more connected, yet so many people still feel alone. Welcome to the podcast, my brother.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I pride myself on the intros, man. So the first thing for the icebreaker, man. So your father, first little small little backstory. During the pandemic, give or take, my friends and I were always debating the N word, right? So of course, trying to find a book to base the conversation on, I came across your father's book. Loved
Hmm.
the book. Plan on doing the whole platform about it. And it just never happened back then. So it's so funny. Years later, I come across the son in your book. That's crazy how that happened like that. But you being the son of a father that's a creative writer, everything else. What was it like growing up around the influence?
I think the primary impact of growing up in an environment where my father was a creative person, an intellectual, my mother was the same, a creative person, an intellectual whose primary medium was theater rather than literature, uh, is that I actually had to go out into the world to find out that making stuff and being interested in the world through an artist's lens is not something that just everybody was doing, right? I saw that stuff in my household the same way you see anything else your parents model for you. And it took me some time to understand that those are actually unusual circumstances. So when I guess would play with other kids or form relationships outside of the family, I was always trying to do something creative, let's make a movie, let's put on a play, let's put on a dance concert, let's build something with our hands. And I had to learn that a lot of people found that surprising coming from someone so young, and also maybe we're uncomfortable with it, right? We're like a little bit threatened by it. Now, of course, as an adult creative myself, I'm very grateful for the blueprint that I got from both of my folks, and I continue even today to benefit from both of my parents as a creative sounding board. So if I'm working on something, I can always send it to either one of them, usually both of them, and we can have a productive discourse about what it means, where it's going. Some books I might read to uh, inform what I'm doing, and that's a really cool component of being a part of that family.
So I noticed two things. Mostly in sports, we do a sports analogy right quick, right? You're kind of like more like Dale Curry and Steph Curry, more than
Sure.
part of the LeBron James and the Bronny effect, right? But my only point being, I see two roles most times. A person want to embrace what their parents were doing, or they want to go the opposite. Like for me, I don't have like famous parents, but my grandparents and my parents are kind of prominent where I'm from. I
Okay.
spent my whole life going like away. Like I want to have my own identity. I want to do my own thing. That's their thing. You go on this long road right back in the middle of what they were doing anyway. So it's like it's crazy. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's funny that you got Steph and Dell versus Bron and Bronny. Um, I think hmm, I certainly never had a phase where I was consciously trying to do something contrary to my folks. But I think at the same time, there's a way that my specific creative interventions when I was younger really baffled my parents. As you notice in the book, 99 Problems Finding the One, and elsewhere in life, of course, I'm really involved in the punk rock subculture. I've been playing in bands, making zines, attending shows since I was 13 or 14 years old. And I'm in 2 bands today, and I'm still very involved in the New York City DIY punk scene. And obviously, someone who engages with punk culture on the internet. And I think there is significant overlap between the values of DIY punk rock and the environment I grew up in terms of what my parents were up to, in terms of what they read, in terms of the worldview that they promoted. But for them, it was really surprising that I gravitated to punk because they didn't know much about it. And like most people in this culture, their initial read of it was that there wasn't much room for Black folks in it. So while it wasn't a real rebellion, I think it took some time for both my parents and myself to appreciate the fact that that I was doing something that had a lot to do with their example, even though they didn't immediately recognize it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let's go into the main event, man. 99 Problems. Finding the One. This is the automatic, obvious Jay-Z connection right here, I would say. So tell me about that title, like where that idea came from, and was that always the title, or was it like a working title before?
The title came pretty early, actually. One of my friends who appears as a character in the book, Sasha Bonet, she's a writer herself. She put out her debut book this time last year. It's called The Water Bearers, a
Yeah.
memoir of mothers and daughters.
And I will have her as a guest next month. I talked to her a couple of days ago, and I will have her on the podcast, man. I'm excited about that.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm happy to hear that. I look forward to that episode. She and I had a conversation like before I came up with the idea for 99 Problems Finding the One, where she was like, you should write a book about love. And I kept thinking, like, what is the angle that I would take on that subject? And I think it really crystallized once I came up with the title. Obviously, 99 Problems, the Jay-Z version, the Ice-T version, those songs are both quite cynical, right? They have a slightly, shall we say, hostile view of love. Meanwhile, the concept of the one, at least as I was introduced to it, is quite romantic. It's very incompatible with what Ice-T and Jay-Z are saying in their songs. And I think culturally, I kind of felt like somebody stuck between these two different messages, a very sincere, wholesome view of love, a more stylized, mainstream, and commodified view of love as expressed in those songs. And I liked how the title just sort of landed you right in that tension. And then I kind of explore that tension for the duration of the book.
So, I mean, of course, you couldn't have had a genie in the bottle or a crystal ball to understand the whole Jay-Z resurgence a couple weeks ago, the whole New York thing and everything else, the meat picnic. So, like, my question is, anything dealing with Jay-Z at all right now, it's a wave. It's gonna. So, how do you feel about that? Like that just happened. It's a coincidence, but it's a good wave.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I couldn't have totally foreseen it, but at the same time, I see Hova as just such a sort of like restless figure who's always going to be evolving, always going to be up to something. Sometimes changing the way he presents himself, sometimes adding to the myth, the self myth, sometimes undermining it. And I think literature is meant to be exactly as restless, exactly as difficult to pin down and dynamic. And so creating a book that conjures associations with a figure like that, I thought would be a stimulating thing to do that would kind of change valences over time, right? So even this particular Jay-Z resurgence, I think, has one kind of overtone. But hopefully the book's around a long time. It's possible that people will read the association with that song and with Jay completely differently 10 years from now, which I welcome and find exciting.
I want to ask you a very important question as a writer myself. I take my chapter titles seriously. I take my subtitles seriously. Um, I'm more serious than most people. You have some very interesting titles in your book, the chapter titles and everything like that. So tell me about your process of making your titles and everything, because to me, like an album or like a mixtape, those titles really draw a person. Like, I want to hear this track. Man, what's this about? So for me, the titles in the book are just like that, you know. So give me your take on that.
Yeah, I'm with you on the chapter titles. The way I always instruct my students is that your absolute first responsibility as an artist on the page is to motivate the reader to turn the damn pages. Hook, nook, or crook, that's what we got to figure out. There are other components of writing besides that, for sure. But this must be the categorical imperative. Make the reader turn the damn pages. I think if that is your linchpin, your overarching principle, then the chapter titles become another means of creating a hook, of creating momentum. And so I think when I'm naming a chapter, I'm not just thinking about trying to summarize the ideas contained therein. I'm also thinking about how would this phrase feel if I had no context and I just saw it on a sheet of paper? Can I make that phrase provocative, strange, funny enough that someone's going to want to dive in just based on, you know, that sentence fragment that I've positioned as the chapter title?
So I spent the past decade as a writer making a parallel to the music game a lot with the writing game. I mean, how I create books, like albums, other concepts as well. So you being an actual musician, when you're creating, do you feel like these are two different rooms in your mind, or do they take the same creative space whenever you're doing these processes?
There's a lot of overlap between the two, although I think different rooms in the mind is a good analogy. I think I share that impression. With music, I think brevity is so important, conciseness is so important, but I very often experience that something I'm exploring on the page is also showing up in the songwriting I'm doing, even though the modes and registers I'm using to communicate might be so different. Often I would kind of like write myself into a corner while I was working on this book, and I would find myself just intuitively walking into another room in my apartment and picking up the guitar. And then once I started jamming on something on the guitar or going back to something I was already working on, having given myself this like mental palate cleanser actually helped me to figure out the solution to the corner I painted myself into in the prose. So I think they're definitely mutually reinforcing projects, being a songwriter, being a prose writer, but even more than that, distracting the mind with a seemingly unrelated task often unlocks something in the task we were working on before.
You know, the past 2 years, I've been doing a lot of jigsaw puzzles, and lately I've been on Legos a lot lately, right? I'm not a musician, I can't relate to that part, but when it comes to doing something totally not related to the writing, I'm in the middle of doing that process. It does do something in my mind where I'm like, okay, that's what I gotta go with. It just,
Yep.
I can't explain scientifically why that is, but it works.
No, I always joke how that's the formula for the plot resolution on the show House MD. You got a doctor, he's puzzling over some diagnostic problem. He spends all day thinking about it. He can't crack it. Then he goes away, deals with something else in his life, and whatever happens over there neatly connects with the thing he was trying to figure out before. It seems very contrived when you watch it, but I guess I have to say, I find it 100% realistic, actually.
Even the whole concept, like most people say they get the most ideas in the shower.
Right.
For me, I go in the shower right quick, and the whole thing comes to my mind. The title, the chapters, like
Mm.
everything. So it's like I could just like take more showers clearly, and then it just we
No,
can just
that's
the
real.
process, take more showers, right?
That's right. I experience the same thing with running. I mean, I like to run for its own sake, but I get most of my best ideas when when actually I'm so tired that it's hard to think. But because my body is so absorbed with this one thing, it's almost like my mind is more receptive. Like my antenna are picking up more than I can pick up when I'm sitting in a chair.
And as a writer, that's studying some of the more famous writers and about their process. Almost all of them speak about at some point they go and take a walk or they go and do some kind of motion.
Right.
The most common thing you see in most writers, some kind of movement, whatever it is, yoga or something,
Mm-hmm.
and it frees them up.
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of joke about in the book, I'm somebody who struggles to remember that I'm in a physical form. You know, I can get so lost in my own inner space that my immediate physical experience is like not the thing I feel like I have the most access to. So if I find a task that like forces me to be extremely immediate, extremely visceral, ironically, um, the restorative effect that has makes me think much more clearly, which is to me feels miraculous every time it happens.
One last thing on this before we pivot: does
Sure.
rhythm influence your prose?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I felt way more conscious of with this book than my first book, Boys in the Void, a mixtape to my brother, is I really wrote it anticipating going out into the world and performing parts of the book, right? And in the first book, I was thinking so much about the ideas, the anecdotes, having all the language connect in a fascinating way. I never really spent much time thinking about how is it going to feel to stand in the front of a room and say these words out loud and look into the eyes of the people who are listening to it. With the second book, with 99 Problems Finding the One, I was extremely thoughtful about that. And the rhythm, the cadence, the places where you would take a breath if you were reading it out loud, all those things were much more front of mind. And they were front of mind specifically because I wanted to have a particular experience of reading this stuff in public. I wanted to create a mood that is conducive to the book's message.
Man, could you please expound upon that a little bit more? Because as a poet, and I do a lot of like open mics and poet slams and everything, I try to explain to people how much a poem on the page is different than how I edit it to perform it.
That's
Where I
right.
make space, where I make breath, where I make certain choices is
Mm-hmm.
different for performance versus on the page. So speak about what you just said about thinking about it being out loud. And that's different.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I like this past semester, I taught a graduate writing course called The Comedian as Essayist. And one of the things we studied is comics, stand up artists who had specials we could watch and memoirs we could read. And we discussed what are the techniques that are happening in the memoir on the page, what are the techniques that are very specific to the stage, and how the artist uses the presence of other folks in the room as features of the text that they're creating. And I think thinking so much about that sort of led me to kind of writing towards punchlines, right? If I'm, and by the way, writing towards punchlines, because I know I'm reading to an audience that is trying really hard not to look at their phones. You know what I'm saying? So I feel under a certain amount of pressure to deliver a certain amount of payoff in a concise amount of words and space. And I think imagining people in a room staying engaged with me and resisting the temptation to look at their phones while I'm reading kind of guides every paragraph in this book.
Man, I'm getting so excited with this conversation. I love talking shop like this, man. I saw this a couple weeks ago, right? one of my favorite battle rappers is Loaded Lux, right? Out of New York. Loaded Lux, I love him, right? But he the kind of battle rapper, some guys, they're doing the punch thing. Punch, 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 like you just said. But Loaded Lux, everything leading up to the punch is as powerful as a punch. But the audience, if you're on the phone, like you said, if you're not paying attention, you're not catching it, you're only sitting there waiting for the punch.
That's
But
right.
everything he did for the past 4 bars is just as profound, if not more.
That's right.
But as a creative, it's like making a choice. Like, how do you write to that? Like, do you just write to the punch? They wait for the. It's like, come on to punch. Come on, punch.
That's right.
Or do you go ahead and lean into that? I'm gonna show you this whole setup, this whole imagery. You know, what you think about that as a musician, as a writer?
Man, I love that analogy because I do think that's a real dilemma. The honest answer is that I was trying to split the difference. So I think the first sentence in 99 Problems Finding the One is trying to start set a particular tone, I should say, right? It's like, I think the first sentence is something like, the second line of my home address, apartment 1N, is a euphemistic account of who lives inside.
Yes, I remember that. Yep.
So I'm trying to tell you what your main character situation is. And when I say situation, I mean is where, who he lives with, the fact that he lives alone, but also his social political situation, which is being read and interpreted as 1N, despite being a person. And I think that I kind of wanted to make sentences in the book that are almost a story unto themselves, but also build up to sort of like bigger, harder hitting payoffs on the paragraph or page basis. So I want the individual sentences to pack a wallop that feels kind of like a punchline, but also build to a crescendo that is like a moderate punchline rather than a mini one. And the thinking behind that, again, it just goes back to how competitive the attention economy is. It's really easy for me to visualize somebody having all these other different sources of entertainment that could motivate them to pull their eyes away from the book. And I want to be competing with those things as vigorously as I can.
I think it's the whole Jay-Z paradigm once again, right? Whenever he was talking about, honestly, I could be like Talib Kweli, but he was like, I made 5 mil, I ain't rhyme like common sense. So it's like, I could do all this intricate stuff to impress my peers, but it's like, this is where the actual payoff is, evidently. So I'm gonna give y'all girls. I'm gonna give y'all, big pimping. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've always found that quote fascinating too, because Jay-Z is telling you throughout his entire discography, I'm a person who's trying to understand the market. I'm trying to understand what y'all will actually pay me for. And that is not a static thing. It's always shifting, but it tends to be different than what I would do of my own accord. And I really appreciate the transparency of those observations. But I also think it's kind of funny because he's almost making fun of the audience, saying, you can call what I'm doing dumb, you could call it destructive, you could call it highly commercial, but I'm doing this because this is what you people want. So if you think it's stupid, you got to blame the audience at least as much as you're blaming me.
And now you go into my favorite Jay-Z song, well, amongst my favorite, the one he called Ignorant Shit. The ignorant shit you like, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Ignorant shit.
Totally. Which is frustrating. There's a part of me that's like, well, what would it look like for Jay-Z as an artist to kind of untether himself from those expectations and just do the thing that speaks to him? But obviously I'm biased. I tend to be prejudiced in favor of the artist, and I tend to kind of empathize with those frustrations, with the need to balance satisfying your own muse and paying the rent.
Let me tell you my formula for every poet slam, right? For a poet slam, we get 3 rounds. The first 2 rounds, I'm trying to impress the judges for winning the slam. The 3rd round, I'm doing what I wanted. Now I'm getting real intricate. I'm getting real, all these, dynamic pockets and all that. That's for me though. But the first 2 rounds, I'm gonna do what y'all need to give me
Right.
this score. It's kind of the thing.
Yeah, that's a really good way to break it down. But even in that case, right, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 rounds for the people, 1 for you. I think when I hear stuff like that, I'm
I
like,
gotta have something. I gotta have something.
of course,
I gotta have
yeah,
something.
you got it. I mean, at the end of the day, you're the one. You know, in theory, you should be calling the shots, but the nature of artistry is we got to consider those critics, those onlookers.
You being a musician, a part of a band, right? You mentioned at one point in the book about being a part of a writing workshop. My question is, what was it like? Because most time this writing thing is a very solo endeavor. I compare it to like solo rock climbing or something like that. What was it like writing a part of a group versus whenever you're normally writing by yourself? I'm sure.
Yeah, huh? It's funny you bring that up. I think I'm one of those writers who's a bit skeptical of the workshop model. I do understand.
Okay. Do tell.
Well, okay. Here's the best way to break it down. I think when you're trying to train young people to get involved with literature, it's important to emphasize to them that they have a responsibility to become dutiful, attentive, canny readers, and through developing their facility as readers, they might begin to make critiques, observations, claims about what an artist could do better or do less of. But their first task should be to get good enough at reading that their opinion about what an artist is doing is grounded by something thoughtful and wise. In the current culture, there's so much emphasis on takes, opinions, that I think sometimes a writer's workshop can become too slanted in favor of people sort of like getting their takes off rather than spending some like patient, generous time with somebody else's text in a way where the goal is to read thoroughly rather than have the most provocative opinion. I really struggle with that. I'm not really interested in taste, frankly, as odd a thing as that might be to say. If someone says, "Oh, I read Jamaica Kincaid's Lucy, I didn't really like it," that statement doesn't mean anything to me. You got to tell me something besides like or dislike. You know what I mean? It's like you could go to a Michelin-starred restaurant, order a salad, and say you don't like it. Does that mean it's not fine dining? To me, obviously not, right? So if Jamaica Kincaid is our Michelin-starred restaurant, you need to bring something to the table as a consumer, as a reader, to even validate, to even justify your sense of taste and why it doesn't happen to jive with this. Because a bunch of people who have really refined taste in this art form, or if we want to keep the restaurant analogy, refined taste in food, have already said this person is the top of the shelf, right? So I kind of not so interested if all you got to give me is you didn't like it.
Now you can't do that. You can't do that because of course being a book influencer, if you were in that space, you see some real thorough reviews of books,
Right.
and the person give you layout. This worked. This didn't work. This could have been better. Like I want a review like that. You can't just tell me like, yeah, you said I didn't like this book. Like, okay, like you got to give more than that.
For sure.
Like, or even like I do like movie reviews as well. I can't just say I didn't like this movie. I got to say why I didn't like it, what didn't work. What could have been better.
I think I want to hear in the review a sense that this person is finally attuned to what's happening in the art. And then I'm interested in their evaluation of it.
Yes.
But if I don't have a sense that it's grounded with like that level of attunement, the opinion part doesn't really do anything for me. And unfortunately, I think the nature of social media, where the game is to basically do or say anything that will generate the most attention, actually disincentivizes people from developing thoughtful analyses of things, and instead favors hot takes.
Okay, okay. Let me ask you about this question right here, man. Social media and the loneliness paradox, right? So we live in a time with the most connected ever with these devices, like we do it
That's
right
right.
now. But at the same exact time, it's one of the most loneliest times ever. Like I see so many articles per day about the loneliness epidemic, and you go to certain social settings, and you see all these people in the same space, but all of them in their individual phone.
Right.
Even going to a Jay-Z concert, everybody got their phone trying to record. You're not really in the moment. You're not really there with your person that you're there with. You trying to record. So it's like, what's your thoughts about today's social media app loneliness time? Man?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem that's so pervasive. When you try to talk about it, you almost feel like a fish describing water. It's so close to your face, you can't always see it. But to me, the main consequence of the sort of like app sprawl, as I would call it, is that people really uh, it's really easy to build a lifestyle that magnifies rather than challenges your self-absorption. So we're human beings, we're in a weird paradox. We're both naturally social creatures and naturally self-obsessed creatures. And we spend most of the time cradle to casket trying to battle between those two impulses and hopefully arrive at some kind of happy medium, right? Easier said than done. But the nature of the app sprawl is such that you can curate your day-to-day experience so minutely that you sort of stunt your frustration threshold. You stunt your level of patience. You limit the sort of tolerance and indulgence that you're willing to extend to another person. One really antisocial example that always comes to mind to me is those preferences for conversation or silence in an Uber ride. I find that to be so deeply dystopian that you could call someone to pick you up in a car and indicate before you ever speak to them that you would prefer that they not interact with you at all. I'm sure there's some good arguments for why that control is available. I know, Uber can be dangerous for some people. Sometimes the driver's intentions can be untoward. I know that's a possibility, but the idea that I'm going to hire a private taxi for myself where I have effectively forbidden another human being from interacting with me in the very brief time we're going to be in a car together. I think the cumulative effect of a bunch of little stuff like that is that we are alienated from each other and alienated from ourselves. And so even when we try to make moves to address our loneliness, we're not even in touch enough with our own desires or aware enough of other people to build a bridge between the two.
It's funny you said that, man. Last year, I had about a 6 month stretch. I was doing Uber like a lot, right? And I work at night. I work overnight. So in the morning when I get off, I'm tired. I'm out of it, whatever. And they want to talk my head off. I'm like, please, just take me to my house. Like, I wish I had that option. Like, I don't want to engage, man. Just take me to the crib, drop me off.
No, I get it. I understand, but it seems like it's so key to your. There's like a muscle you get from having an interaction with someone where you say, "Hey, man, no disrespect, but I just got off a 12-hour shift. I'm wiped," and they go, "Oh, okay, you got it." Just the act of doing that over and over again, I think it like strengthens something in yourself that if you lose it, you'll sort of like avoid social contact altogether.
You make a strong point. You make a real strong point. I like this particular chapter in the book, man. Let's talk about Destiny Child in the song Soldier, one of my favorite Destiny Child songs.
It's about.
I'm a big T.I. fan. I'm a big Lil Wayne. I'm in Louisiana, of course. I'm a big Lil Wayne fan, right?
Oh, okay.
So he was definitely the child to enter a much larger conversation about masculinity, protection, violence, and what society tells men is attractive. Why is that song the right lens for that argument?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate the question. I think the reason I was so fascinated with Soldier is Black people have essentially been at odds with the federal government since before there was a federal government in this country, right? We've been at odds with the state, I should say, the organized version of the society by our very uh, nature, even before the country's inception. So for a group of Black women to make a romantic song where they say, I'm looking for a dude who embodies all the qualities of the shock troops of the empire. The shock troops of the empire are actually my romantic ideal. If the beat is jamming, if the melody's hot, most of us are gonna nod our heads to that. We're not gonna even think about what they're saying. But they could have said anything and they chose to say that, right? I think that song encapsulates how militarism and capitalism are so endemic to Black experience, especially, that we don't think about how they undermine our capacity to connect with one another, how they impose expectations on us and the people around us that are actually not conducive to being a community, to loving one another, to forming and sustaining families. And you can't, there's also a biographical component to it. Obviously, that song came out in the early 2000s. That's when I was a teenager. And my sense is that a lot of the people around me, men and women, sort of cultivated personalities according to the archetypes that are being set up in that song.
Yes.
Beyonce says this is what desirability is.
Yes.
Yeah, well, this is what I'm going to conform to so I can not be alone. And so I'm kind of questioning, are there some drawbacks to having a song like this, which again has, in my view, a deeply perverse element to it, Black people aspiring to be like the state? Are there sort of like negative trickle down consequences in terms of how that influences our view of each other and our view of love?
Yeah, as a guy in the book space for a long time, most times there are way more ladies than guys in the space. So when you hear the ladies rant and rave about the books that they love and the fictional guys they like, the main characters, it's a lot of times it's these kind of guys, man. It's these, these kind of thug images and these kind of, you a boss kind of dude. You the dope boy. You the kingpin. TV shows like Power and Empire, all these things that we take in. If you're a guy looking at that as a young man, you think the only shot I got to get a woman like this is to be that guy.
That's right.
Only shot I have.
Yeah, and I think it's funny to hear you like readily, draw the line from Soldier to that show Power. I think I'm not saying like Destiny's Child is like responsible for the appetite for a show like that, but I think they're very related. And sometimes I'll talk to older people or usually women who are defensive of Destiny's Child, and they'll say, "Oh, it's just entertainment, right? This is not literal." But I'm like, I don't know, man. I know a lot of people who took these ideas to the bank.
Yes. So do you think indirectly we are teaching men to pursue connection or to perform an identity they believe will make them desirable?
Yeah, I do think that. And the double standard comes into play because I think, a lot of folks will say the difficulty in their relationship stems from like a lack of communication, lack of introspection, the men especially not being gentle or generous enough to the women. These are complaints I'm completely sympathetic to. But then on the other hand, I would say, well, how are these men being socialized? Are they being encouraged to be gentle, generous, or introspective outside of the context of your relationship? And the answer is usually no, they're being conditioned to be soldiers. So my thing is, people, in my opinion, human beings have usually pretty limited repertoires. It's kind of rare for someone to show up in a relationship in some way that doesn't reflect who they are in all their other domains of life. So to me, we gotta extend the fellas some grace for not being the pillars of sensitivity and understanding. If we've been brought up to be like to aspire to be like the characters on Power, like you said.
Yeah, shout out to Ghost. Shout out to Ghost. But the next idea, I love this one as well as a creative. Living in ideas versus nature, right? So you right that we live more in our ideas than we live in nature. As a creative person whose mind is constantly generating ideas, how do you get out of your head and back into the world around you?
Yeah, a great question. I think it's always a struggle. I was just in LA last week, which is not, I haven't spent a lot of time on the West Coast of my life. And I was really taken aback by the natural beauty there. I'd been to California before, but I haven't spent that much time there. And I think the sort of like baseline view the average LA person has when they lift the blinds in the morning compared to the baseline view a person in the Midwest tends to have is stunning. I think it's the disparity between the two kind of blew me away. And I found myself thinking about exactly what you're saying. Like, what would it mean for me to just try to focus on the details of the natural experience here rather than try to impose some sort of lens or interpretation about what it all means? And as an artist, what it all means is like my main jam, right? I mean, I spend a lot of time trying to articulate what it all means. But in order to do that deftly, I think I need to maintain my capacity to just stay in the awe, stay in the wonder, stay in the mystery. And it takes effort. It takes rehearsal, I would say.
I'm not comparing myself to Lil Wayne or Eminem, but I'm saying I've heard those kind of guys talk about like words are always coming. Like whenever they're just chilling, they're not doing anything.
Right.
They can't. And even Joe Budden he's a retired rapper, but Joe Budden even says like he still get bars in his head. Like the rhymes still come. He's been so long doing this thing. So like, how do you turn it off?
That's right.
I don't know. I can't seem to do it. It's a concerted effort to really be like, all right, I'm just in this moment. I'm not thinking about anything, you know.
Yeah. It's funny you spend at least the first part of your life trying to build the habit to produce the material. And then it seems like once you've been in the game a while, the challenge is limiting the habit.
And then again, this book being about relationships, like talk about if you're dating a person that's not a creative, if they can't relate to that, they're really, I want to say a word, a standard person. They go to work, come home, they clock out, and that's it. But like we never clock out.
That's right.
Like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, whatever time it is, something is always. So to be present with them even and not like space out for a little while, like try to get them to understand that. Like, what do you say about that? I mean, dating wise.
Well, what I recommend, unfortunately, I think creative people need to be with people who know exactly what they're getting into. Sometimes the only people who are like that are other creative people.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not a like people have to keep to themselves. You got to date your counterpart sort of person. But in this case, we are definitely a unique tribe. And I do think people outside of this tribe really struggle to put what we're doing into context.
I think the bigger paradigm is a lot of time whenever you're on stage performing the poetry or the music or whatever, it's a strong attraction to that
Right.
command of words and what you're doing with the swagger, the bravado, whatever they think they're seeing.
Yep.
And when they finally with you to realize, like, wait a minute, like you really always write? Are you always reading? You're really always watching other writers and podcasts and like yeah, this is how the stage thing happened to begin with, right? You know, like,
Yeah,
you
I think
understand
as a
how they go
culture,
together, like you know.
yeah, in theory, yeah, I mean, right. You would think they would know it. I think we struggle with that. I remember, I can't remember where I saw this, but I saw an interview using a sports analogy again. I saw an interview with a bunch of Kobe Bryant's high school classmates, and they were basically saying this guy was the most famous person at our high school. So, in a sense, he was popular. But when we went to parties and
Yeah,
social events,
you're
he
not there.
was never there.
Like, you don't see him.
He's working. And that's why he's Kobe Bryant. But there's a way a person from the outside would say, oh, well, the cool thing, the whole point of being Kobe Bryant is to be someone who can show up to the party and everyone gives him attention and admiration. And it's like, no, I mean,
It's not.
people who are in it for the thing
Yeah.
itself rather than what the thing earns you,
Yes.
that ain't really what they're doing. You know?
So think about loneliness in this regard, right? They see you on the stage, the whole place is going crazy, you headlining or whatever. When the lights go off and they pack everything up, I think it's there in the book. You're back to being on the bus or whatever, like to yourself. You're back to being. And after all of that happened, you might want to be by yourself. After all of that
Also,
hoopla, you might want to
yeah.
be. So they would never understand that part of loneliness for us either as a creator.
Yeah. A good friend of mine has kind of helped me to see that more clearly by sort of drawing the contemporary artists, a parallel between the contemporary artist role and the shaman's role in sort of like primeval cultures, right? The shaman or the medicine man, medicine woman is often someone who is, leading ceremonies, speaking at big events where the whole community comes together. But when they're not doing that, they usually live somewhere apart from the rest of the community.
Yes.
And they almost gather power from that solitude.
Isolation. That's right. Yeah.
And so they spend all this time basically alternating between profound isolation and extreme connection, extreme togetherness. And it's like, okay, cool. I see how I'm descended from that tradition. I see how you are. What does someone who has that role do to have relationships? Where does it fit in exactly?
Bro, I am an old school martial art head. I'm a kung fu theater kind of kid growing up in the 80s and the 90s. In most of those movies, the Grand Master lived by himself off in the mountains or in the forest, or you need to go to his house or to his dojo. Like you got to go through all these things to get to.
That's right.
Like you're saying, like he off to himself, you know.
I think that's a theme in the book is like how can somebody both be true to who they are if that's the role that they've kind of been born into, and value family, value connection, value relationships. I'm not sitting here telling anybody it can't be done. I'm just pointing out there is a tension.
Yes. Let's go to the transfer portal, man. Transfer portal, right? Use the medium, use the modern sport transfer portal as a metaphor for relationships and movement, right? So, like, let's talk about this. In today's society, people get divorced so quickly or they break up so fast because they feel like there's greener grass somewhere else, the possibility is there. Versus traditional, not saying it's better either way, but it took a lot more to leave than it does now.
Right.
So, is the transfer portal ideology hurting today's relationship? Is the question. Take my time to South Beach.
Yeah, no. So I would say it's certainly hurting us and our capacity to build lasting connections. I don't think it has to, though. I really started to think about this because a friend of mine was saying, he has season tickets to USC basketball games, and he and his mother go. And his mother was saying, I'm glad if the kids don't like their situation, they can leave. But the fact that so many of them leave is making it very difficult to be invested in the team, because I don't know who half these people are. And part of what makes the team is that you, or at least used to, grow with these people. You see a redshirt freshman, and then 4 years later they're a senior, and you feel like you are invested in this person's success because you saw them struggle, and you saw them struggle in the same place. I think that I'm excited for folks having more options, having more mobility, having more leverage. When I say that, I mean both athletes and people in relationships. But maybe what we need is a little more appreciation for the fact that fleeing at the first sign of adversity has a cost. And the thing that you're losing, right, the sense of evolution with the person, growth with the person, is something that you can't compensate for by just fleeing a bunch of different experiences. It's something you can only really get via some loyalty, via some grit.
And so just because you can transfer doesn't mean you should always, correct? Just because you can.
That's right. Yeah. The grass is rarely greener, right? I mean, that's why we have that adage. But I don't know, on both fronts, athletes and people in relationships, I don't know if we're hearing that message enough. There is something to be gained from giving a difficult situation a little more time.
I got a few more questions for you, my man. A few more questions. So I love this chapter as well, man. Naming yourself and identity, right? You explore the power of naming and identity. What kind of empowerment comes from having the ability to name yourself rather than simply accepting the identity society gave to you?
Well, I think in the U.S. there's a kind of dissonance here that we're all rubbing up against. On the one hand, the conservatives in this culture are always talking about, when did your family get here? How did they get here? And whatever that family history is your source of authenticity or authority. And then on the other hand, we have this point of view that American exceptionalism means people can reinvent themselves whenever they like. They can be whatever they say they are. And it ain't where you're from, it's where you're at. And so everybody's kind of caught between these two arguments. Oh, your history matters so much. Only thing you can be is a direct echo of your ancestors. And you can cut yourself off from history entirely, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and become something new. I think naming yourself is kind of a way of grounding and tuning out all that madness, saying, here is what I think is the ethic that organizes my life. Here is the lineage I am creating and embracing by choice. And whatever people try to impose upon me or expect of me based on history, based on their prejudice, based on their own ignorance is irrelevant, because I've already branded myself with the idea of a person, of a family, of a tradition that resonates spiritually. My folks did that, and I've always been inspired by that. And I admire people who make choices like that in their own lives.
Yeah, me being a long time Black history buff, if you will, always admired, of course, the Nation of Islam, of course, a lot of Black liberation movement. They were real big on renaming themselves, taking on, taking off the old name. And I'm reclaiming. I always admired those groups.
Yeah, I think this is funny. I was just talking to a friend about this. I think Black folks renaming themselves is so closely associated with Islam that, in my experience, I've met a lot of people who just sort of readily assume that was the motivation for my family choosing a different name. And it wasn't a religious motivation, but I do feel a kind of immediate kinship with people like that, because the sense that black folks have, black folks in the United States specifically, have had their history really meaningfully interrupted, can lead you to the idea that we got to have a countermeasure. We have to account for that interrupted history, but also pick a new origin story, a new starting point, and choose to have pride in it. And I don't think that's the only way to go, but I like it. I respect it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My next topic, right? We talk about like having in black people having different experiences that are outside what a person would think is a black thing, right? So it's important right now because we got a case going on, we know in the nation right now going on where a young black brother was amongst a lot of other people doing something different that a lot of us don't tend to always do. And some of the main backlash immediately was like, why would he be over there? Why he out there with them? Why even be in that situation? But it's like, even for myself, a lot of things that I enjoy doing, a lot of us are not there when I go and do it. When I'm going to do archery, I'm the only black guy. When I go to martial art class, only black guy. When I go to the gun range, only black guy. So many things I love, rock climbing, only black guy. So it's like, if I didn't just do those things anyway without us being there, I would never have those beautiful things that I enjoy so much. So like, how do we expand our experiences is the question. And get outside the box of, that's a black thing. It's not a black thing.
Yeah, to me the big step, and I feel you on all of that. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think the big step for us is to, if you see a black person doing something that you imagine as a departure from normative blackness, instead of immediately defaulting to the assumption that the only motivation that person could have for doing it is to be white or to escape the community, ask yourself, why is he doing that? What positive reasons could that person be motivated to pursue this experience that actually is not related to assimilation or their racial identity specifically, right? I mean, I always call it like the illusion of unanimity. You'd think none of the black folks are into archery because there's some convention that we're not. But once one or two folks do it, some other people are going to say, I always wanted to do that, but I was afraid. I thought I'd be judged. I didn't know if I would be safe, right? But now that I see you doing it, the curiosity I had to begin with, I actually feel more comfortable with. I can actually say it out loud, and I can ask you questions about it. You seem a lot more approachable than, the 10 white people I knew who did it, right? That applies to pretty much everything. But I think the only way you can sort of like take full advantage of that is if you accept that like black people have complexity and that everybody who does something that you don't understand isn't necessarily an Uncle Tom. If you take the time and ask them about it, it probably is something you'll understand. But you can't go, well, neighborhood I grew up in, or my mom and dad, my grandparents, they didn't do that. Thus, it's off limits. I think you have to have more curiosity than judgment. And once you do that, I think you can only gain it. I think it enlarges your sense of yourself. It helps you envision new possibilities for the community. I think it leads to a richer life.
Yeah, let's put it all back into loneliness and dating and relationships, the main topic of all of this, right? It's interesting. If you're the person doing these things, you sound very interesting. Like, wow, you like doing that?
Right.
You like scuba diving? You like rock climbing? You like skydiving? But they would never actually do those things to be interested. Isn't that crazy? You might see somebody else do it, but you wouldn't do it yourself to be interested in yourself. That's crazy.
Well, I always figure it had to have been useful to our survival at some point to kind of have this like reflexive suspicion of certain activities where black people aren't represented. And I have respect for that, right? I assume that coming out of slavery, that was a way of keeping ourselves safe. But the thing you did to survive is not always a thing that'll help you thrive. And we got to make a distinction between the two.
Because if you're a person out here trying to date You're trying to meet a wider variety of people, but you're going to the same kind of places and doing the same kind of things. You might get a lot of the same kind of experiences, ultimately, you know.
Yeah, no, that's facts. Some people, I think that's actually what they're trying to do. They'd almost rather confirm their worldview than have a new experience that might challenge them to be different, right? Oh, these women are all the same. These men are all the same. A lot of people who say stuff like that, I think they kind of want to continue to experience affirmation of that. And they're actually threatened by the possibility that if they went somewhere else, did something different, they might meet some people who are so contrary to their expectations that they would have to grow. And you just gotta check in with yourself and make sure you're not doing that.
And how do you think having wider experiences help us to gain more empathy for other people?
Well, the example that keeps coming to mind as we're talking is like I have a good friend who was a public school teacher for a while. She met this brother who was a coder. This was like probably 10 years ago, where coding was like sort of the go-to thing to tell young people to do to make sure they had a job in the future. And it wasn't as oversaturated as it is now. And this brother who came to her class and talked to the kids, he was like, you might feel like you don't know any Black people who are coders, but I'm part of this network where if any Black coder gets in touch with us, we all work together to support that person and to try to find, education and a job for him in this particular field. And because we're part of this network, we can also hook him up with mentors, he or she up with mentors in this field. And my friend, who at the time, as I said, was a teacher, was actually so inspired by what this brother said to the kids that she actually left her job and did what he was telling the kids to do. So now she is a really accomplished coder.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, real crazy to me. The way she put it to me was like everything that she had imagined that would be difficult for her as a Black woman entering that space, the other Black people in the space, even though there weren't that many, were so organized and so supportive that she now had a way to navigate it. She had a built-in community. And I see that, I'm not a programming person at all, but I just see that example as so powerful. Instead of looking at the other people in the space and saying, man, what are they doing over there? They should have been with us. They clicked up and said, not only are we going to look out for each other, we're going to help people come behind us. And I think that should kind of always be the blueprint.
Totally agree, man. Totally, absolutely agree. So whenever a person reads this book and they come to the conclusion and turn the last page, man, what do you want them to walk away with? Like pondering, like leaving with questions in their mind. Which one to think about?
The biggest takeaway to me is maybe some level of heightened awareness of what we lose when we become too cynical for sincerity, for earnestness, for vulnerability, right? A big point of emphasis in the book is that the future is always more negotiable than people think, right? That we live in these very brief increments of time, but history unfolds, norms change at a pace that is out of proportion with the human lifespan, right? I use this idea of the cosmic calendar introduced by the science communicator Carl Sagan as a way of thinking about historical development on a larger scale. And I guess I'm hoping that folks who spend time engaging with those ideas recognize the power that they have to turn a page, to do something a little different, to take some level of risk, with the hope that we can recapture our capacity to connect with each other. we can find a way to embrace curiosity over judgment, and that these sort of like short-term objectives of like getting the most likes or having the most status are all well and good, but there are more noble possibilities if we think in slightly larger chunks of time.
Man, thank you very, very much for that, man. That concludes our podcast, brother. I totally enjoyed you as a guest. I enjoyed your book. I look forward to maybe in the future, man, bringing you back to discuss your other book, The Boys in the Void, man. I would love to even break that down, man. Discuss that possibly.
Hey, I had a great time talking with you, Sean. Obviously, keep up the great work with the pod. I look forward to the episode with Sasha Bonet.
Yes,
and the
man. I can't wait. I can't wait. Yes. Thank you very much, man.
Be well.
Yes, sir. Have a good evening.
You too.
Peace.